Good evening. I'm home from work. I had another late shift tonight. I have late shifts most nights. Um, it's generally by choice. I find that the cases that come in when it's nighttime out are more interesting, very broadly speaking, than the ones that come in during the daytime. Um, compounded by the fact that I keep odd hours. I like to sleep most of the day. I'm definitely a night owl. And there's something interesting about having a schedule that is so skewed from that of most people. It allows you to step outside. It allows me to step outside of sort of these preconceived ideas of here's when you should be getting ready for bed. Here's when you should start worrying about. I don't like when I would work regular hours. I did not like Sunday nights. I did not like Monday mornings. I have no problem with Monday mornings now. And Monday nights, which is when I would go to work now, those periods of times don't have the stigma that the morning does, which means that even though I don't necessarily like it, it's not as bad as when everybody hates it and it's sort of this global thing of, oh God, Monday mornings are awful. But I find that it also allows me to have some perspective that I think a lot of people don't have. I know I certainly wouldn't have it and didn't have it when I worked more regular hours. But I feel like to some extent it allows me to step outside the box a little bit and sort of be more objective about these kind of restrictions that people put on and sort of abstract ideas that people place on days of the week or times of the day, that kind of stuff. This is a long way of saying that I prefer the night shift. You know, and I'm not trying to justify my habits by saying that I prefer the patients that you tend to get during the night shift. I really do. My goal is to learn as much as I possibly can. And at night, more unusual cases tend to come in. And again, like I said, that's a really broad generalization. Night is also, so you may or may not know this, but the vast majority of people die at night. Something like 70%. 70% of people die when the sun is not up. I actually think it's a little bit higher than that. Now, there's a very sort of prosaic explanation for this, right? It's not because the Grim Reaper comes and gets you during the night, right? It's just that when you're sleeping, when you're vulnerable. Nobody likes to think about this because people want to feel secure when they go to sleep. And as a rule, people do. They feel very secure because, they're saying they're opening themselves up in a very real way. They're making themselves very vulnerable. You're helpless when you're asleep. Some people are very light sleepers, but a lot of people aren't light enough sleepers or aren't as light of a sleeper as they imagine themselves to be. Um, but, when you hear stories, and this kind of thing is very true, people who die shortly after a holiday, shortly after their birthday, shortly after their grandchild graduated college. These are people who were kept alive slightly longer than they might otherwise have been by forcefulness of will. They had this thing to look forward to. And this has been shown in a myriad of studies, that if you have a definite purpose, as opposed to sort of a feeling of malaise or aimlessness, that your prognosis is better in almost every case, in every type of disease. And this includes, of course, latent diseases, which, you listening to this, there is a good chance that you have a latent disease that you don't know about. And the odds are it will never, it's not going to be lethal. You may never know that you had it ever, and it may have nothing to do with your eventual cause of death. In fact, it's very unlikely that it will. So, having a purpose works on a larger time scale as well as a smaller time scale. So when you're asleep, you're letting go of yourself. You're less likely to fight the process that is death. You're also less aware of the signs. So admittedly, heart attack is the leading cause of death in North America. And it's not a surprise. So admittedly, as far as heart attack is concerned, heart attacks tend to occur in the morning or during the course of the day when you're exerting yourself. However, you're generally awake during those times, and heart attack is one of those things that, not always, but often will send you signals before it happens, while it is happening. Some people have thunderclap heart attacks and that's it, they're gone. But most people will experience the typical things, numbness on one side, chest pain, difficulty breathing, a feeling of pressure in the chest, radiating jaw pain, headache, even stomach aches can be a sign of heart attack. But my point is that generally there will be warning signs. And it is very possible, if you are sleeping, although you are more relaxed, your blood pressure is lower, you don't have as much anxiety unless you're having nightmares or night terrors, which is very real and can precipitate a cardiac event. But apart from those things, you tend to be much more level. Your heart tends not to be as stressed. You're supine. There are a bunch of things that sort of mitigate against heart attack. A bunch of circumstances when you're sleeping that mitigate against heart attack, but if you are prone, if you have severe blockage, the heart attack can come at any time. And if you're asleep and you miss the signs, you can have the heart attack while you're asleep, and when you wake up, it may be too late for you to do anything about it. Heart attack is one of those things that every second counts, and you really can do something about it. So being aware of your body and being aware of the signs of something being wrong is, I believe, very powerful and very accurate. I have spoken with a lot of heart attack victims, heart attack patients. Obviously, I've read a lot of the journals on it and lots of studies. And the majority of people, like I said, apart from the thunderclaps, which, that's really a mercy. If you go out via a thunderclap heart attack, you were lucky. Hopefully you were old. But yeah, I mean, my point is that people tend to die at night. There is a symbolic element to it as well, because night, I probably don't need to explain it, but when the sun goes down, it is an analogy of the end of life. And these things, it's very easy to shrug these things off as being silly or not having any scientific merit. But statistics don't lie, and there are a lot of things that we cannot explain. But when you look at the numbers, it is clear that there's something about night that causes more deaths in humans. I don't know about non-humans. But so, when I'm working my shift, the graveyard shift, which is adding a little more morbidity to the proceedings, I will see more patients pass. So there were a few tonight. There were 5 over the course of 12 hours. That's a little bit high. I mean, I do work at a trauma hospital, so it's not horribly unusual. I mean, the incidence of car accidents are higher at night. Drunk driving is higher at night. Night is not a good time to be out and about if you want to live a long time. But so 5 deaths that were patients of mine or patients that I attended to tonight. One was DOA, but from an emotional standpoint, well, that's not true. From an emotional standpoint, a DOA is not as taxing as someone who arrives with a heartbeat and dies subsequently. That can be draining. It is a small price to pay for trying to save lives, and it is, of course, far worse for them and their families and loved ones. Unfortunately, a lot of the cases we see, it's a downtown hospital. The deaths have no immediate family. It can sometimes take weeks or months, not usually months, but weeks to get in touch with the next of kin, if there is one, or just the nearest blood relation. And a lot of times there's no love lost there, and that's hard. That's hard to see as well, because if you're going to die, if you know you are going to die, don't do it in a hospital. People don't have a lot of say over that kind of thing, right? But if you have the choice, don't do it in a hospital. Nobody understands the entire process of death, because once you've experienced it, there's no coming back. And people have, to greater or lesser extents, sort of approached that precipice, and peeked over, as it were, to a greater or lesser extent. And there are people who have flatlined and been revived after 3, 5, even 10 minutes in some extreme cases. And these people often describe what they perceive as how their, I mean, what it is realistically is how their brain perceived its own shutdown. So you get a lot of reports of things like a light at the end of a tunnel. Some people theorize that this is a sort of flashback to birth. And when you are born, the first thing you come from complete darkness into a very bright and painful light, painful auditory sensation, and actual pain. Being born is difficult for the mother. It is more difficult for the baby. Thank God we do not remember that experience. At least we do not consciously remember it. But like I said, some people believe that what you're experiencing in those last moments is sort of a rewind replay of your first very traumatic experience, and that is being born. I don't subscribe to that point of view. I believe that you are simply, that is how the brain interprets its own shutdown process. Okay, you are not experiencing your legs, the muscles in your legs being deprived of oxygen. You, of course, may feel these things, but that is, that is not death. That is not your death. That is the death of a part of your body. But when your brain shuts down, that's the closest that we have to you dying. Right? So, there's something, I believe, about death that is akin to sort of a last gasp, and a brief surge before the ultimate darkness. Right? So, we get reports of that from people who have come near the gates of death, but nobody can possibly know what the actual experience is like. So it makes sense that it makes sense to be obsessed with death to an extent. I heard someone say that, I'm not sure I heard this on NPR recently. I don't recall what the source was, but it was the moment you accept your own mortality as inevitable, natural, and not something to be dreaded is the moment that you grow up. And that is the difference between a child and an adult. I don't believe that either. I mean, I have spent a lot of time around dying people. I've spent a lot of time studying life and the processes of life and death. I would like to think that I was an adult, but I'm certainly not at that point. I don't know if my profession has hindered or helped that process. I don't know where I would be were I in another profession, but I don't feel like I'm any closer to any kind of Zen-like feeling of acceptance towards death. And the more I see it, the more it just feels to me like there's not any great last moment revelation. Like I said, we can't know. But people who have seen somebody die maybe not one person die. If you've seen multiple deaths, because the first one you're going to project on yourself. You're going to, it's a very shocking event. You're bound to infuse it with some kind of importance that it may or may not have. But after you've seen several, you start to be more objective about it. And it has certainly been my conclusion and the conclusion of a lot of my companions and coworkers and colleagues, that it's very boring. We can often predict it to within, a few points of margin of error, what's going to happen and when it's going to happen. We can fairly accurately predict the human response to learning about it and dealing with it. There's a lot we can predict. It ceases to be a great mystery and turns into just the one of the one of the most uncomfortable aspects of our jobs. Because for a lot of cases, there's nothing you can do, and we're all dying. That's trite, but of course it's true. Knowing when you're going to die is only I don't see it as a blessing in any way. I really don't. You hear people say it is because you can get your affairs in order. You can say goodbye to your loved ones. That's for them. That's not for you. And you might wish, I'm sure, of course, everybody does wish that when they die, they don't want their loved ones to suffer any more than is necessary. But it's hard no matter what. It's hard if you can say goodbye. It's hard if you can't say goodbye. There are different kinds of hard. I just don't know that one is better than the other. But I know that for the survivors should care about the patient. The survivors should care about the dying person. And the survivors should have wanted the process to be as untraumatic as possible for the dying person. And generally, that means no warning. So that's why I said, thunderclap, heart attack, dying in your sleep. Although, you hear a lot, so-and-so died peacefully in their sleep. I don't want to shatter anybody's comfort that they take in that, but that doesn't mean a whole lot. It generally means they were still in their bed. For those who've experienced sleep paralysis, that you can be in your bed and be undergoing a very horrible experience indeed. Now, obviously, if you found them splayed on the staircase or downstairs or by the phone, they were struggling to try and get help. So really, that's what that means, is that they were dead and were not able to try and get help. It does not mean that they did not wake up, just fell asleep and did not wake up. It can mean that, but it does not always mean that. You have to take almost every report of a death with a grain of salt, especially public figures. When somebody tells you how someone died, the circumstances of death, it's almost like one of those. It's a globally acceptable time to tell a white lie. So I don't mean to make anybody feel uncomfortable about their own demise, but you know, you can die in your bed and have it not been a pleasant experience. Plenty of people in hospitals die in their bed. We would not describe the method that they die as going peacefully in their sleep. And yet, if it happens at home, that tends to be what the report states. Anyway, so what I wanted to talk about, well, I've kind of broached it a bit here. The 5 people that died tonight, 2 women, 3 men. Everybody knows women tend to live longer than men, but they also tend to be the victims of violence. More than men. Certainly, they tend to be the victims of violence where they were not involved in perpetrating any violence themselves, more than men. One of the women that died as the result of violence. The other one had a stroke. The DOA was a drunk driver. He was drunk and he was driving and got into an accident. It was not with another car, fortunately. It was with a concrete pylon, so very unfortunate what that can do. If you see it, you will approach driving in a very different way. Collisions with other cars are terrible, right? But there's some give in another car. There is no give in a 10-foot concrete steel rebar pylon. It is like jumping off a building. So that was a DOA. So there was no sort of interaction there at all. The stroke victim, when she arrived in the ER, was already unresponsive, but she was alive. For those of you who don't know the sort of the steps of what you should do or the symptoms of what a stroke are, if you find yourself slurring words unexpectedly, or if you can't smile, there's a test to just smile to see if you can lift the corners of your mouth, see if there's any drooping going on. There are a few things like that. It's an odd sensation, an odd taste. Losing your vision. There are a lot of symptoms. But, and similar to heart attack, I do believe that most people can differentiate between, oh, this is something, I'm not familiar with this feeling, but I think it's okay, or this feels very wrong. You have to be sensitive to that, and it's better to err on the side of caution, obviously. If you think you're having a heart attack or a stroke, go to an emergency room. Do not try and ride it out. Don't take an aspirin and lie down. Take an aspirin, but go to an emergency room. Don't drive yourself. That is what we have ambulances for. So play it safe. So the stroke victim was unresponsive. She was in her late 50s. I don't recall her exact age. And it was her 4th stroke. She had had a history of TIAs, which are transient ischemic events, mini strokes. but she had a much larger one. This was a hemorrhagic stroke, so she bled out. A vessel in her brain broke. Blood spilled into the openings in her brain, and it killed her. So it was. It's hard to know how that experience was for her. The brain, in spite of what you may think, because you've had awful headaches, the brain itself does not feel pain. So it's unlikely that it was painful. It may have been painful, but the pain would have been similar to a headache, which is not actually pain inside the brain. But there wasn't much to learn from that case, and it was very unfortunate. And she was with her husband, so that was very sad. The woman who died as the result of violence was not with her husband, but it was her husband who committed the violence. It is astonishing to me how much violent crime is committed by people who either love or have loved each other. I have no doubt that there have been husband-wife murders where, and wives have killed husbands as well, where they still loved each other. Even the one who murdered the other one still loved that person. I'm not about to get into the possible psychoses that could cause such a lapse in rational thought, but I do not think that it precludes love. But it is a shameful and alarming percentage when you look at violent crime statistics. Your odds of being hurt by a stranger are really, really low. Really low. That's what everybody worries about. You don't worry about the person sitting next to you in the car on the drive home. You worry about the person crossing at the light you just stopped at. But that is far and away not the case. I mean, it can happen, right? But you should worry more about those who live in your house than those who would break into your house, statistically speaking. So that was very unfortunate, but very common. So let's see, I covered the two women, the DOA male, and there were two other men. As you might expect, they were both heart attacks, but no, one was a heart attack. It was actually what they call an aortic dissection that precipitated a heart attack. Basically, an opening in the main supply of blood from the heart ripped. There's a lot of pressure there. There's a lot of forceful blood being pushed through there, so even a very small rip will or can become a very large problem very quickly, especially if you have a history of hypertension, which this person did have. So the dissection became quite large, quite quick, and then there was blood spilling into his chest cavity. There was not enough blood getting to the rest of his body to go back to his heart, and before we could do the procedure to correct, he had a heart attack and died. He was conscious when he came into the emergency room, although he was not very lucid. Yeah. I'm not. I don't find anything romantic about death. I find suicide abhorrent. I realize I cannot, unless I got to that point, there's no way that I can understand, truly understand what would cause someone to commit suicide. There's a lot of pain in the world, and sometimes clearly there's more pain than some people can handle. But I don't participate in or believe in the romanticizing of death in any way. To me and to most of my colleagues, it is a very, as I said before, a very prosaic experience and one to be avoided at all costs. You can only die once. It's kind of like getting a tattoo. Don't make any hasty decisions. And take care of yourself. I don't want to see you in the ER. And I certainly don't want to put a white sheet over your head. A lot of doctors get a bad reputation for being glib about death. It's a defense mechanism. And it is, I can see why it would happen. I've been guilty of being glib about it in the past. I try not to be, because I realize, and we all realize how important it is to, and how we need to be respectful of this human life. But it's easy to fall, when you see it so much, to fall into this sort of trying to put up a wall between you and the event, because every time you see it, it reminds you of how seemingly meaningless everything is. And I don't believe life is meaningless, but it can feel that way, in these situations. So you try to sort of bulwark yourself against those feelings. Yeah. The fifth person who died tonight had brain cancer. I know what you're thinking, and that is brain cancer. Why would someone with brain cancer die in an emergency room? Why? It's not that kind of an illness, right? This person had been diagnosed with brain cancer 2 years ago. It was given 3 months to live with the most aggressive chemotherapy, radiation treatment available. He chose not to take the radiation treatment, not to take the chemotherapy. He did some holistic macrobiotic stuff, and he lived for 2 full years. In spite of experts' predictions. Now, eventually, it did catch up with him. And much like the stroke victim, he bled out. He was riddled with cancer when he came in, and he knew he was going to die. He was able to express to me how happy he was that he had taken those last 2 years and lived them outside of the hospital without any treatment. And I believe that treatment would not have saved him. It very likely may have killed him earlier. Everybody has to make that choice when they come down with a disease where the treatment is almost as bad as the disease itself. I believe this person made the right choice. He had a wife that he married 6 months after he was diagnosed, so they were together for like 4 years, but they were married for 18 months before he passed. She was with him, and I could see how much they loved each other. So that was one of the instances where it was very difficult to witness, but you have to be professional. But it was also very inspiring, and there are so many times, like I said, where it seems completely meaningless and just so drab, and you come in on this cot and you leave on this cot, but you never leave. You go downstairs, and it seems so random sometimes who lives and who dies. But this is one of those cases where, although it was a horrible event, it sort of made you swell up with kind of a universal love and appreciation. And this man, he was in his 30s. I mean, he was I think 33. He was not old. He was not a smoker. I don't know if they ever determined why he got the cancer that he did. But he was inspirational. He went out and lived in those 18 months. In those 2 years. He lived a lot. He got married. He traveled the world. That's all that matters. I mean, you expand that by an order of 10 and you have our entire lives, or an order of 20, you have our entire lives. And it's just a matter of the length of time. But in terms of the breadth of experience, he got a lifetime's worth in a very small window. So that, like I said, that was difficult, but I left that feeling good. And his widow was distraught, crying but smiling, because she was so happy that he chose that route instead of the route of becoming essentially an invalid from the chemotherapy and radiation. So yeah, death is coming for everybody. We have to prepare for it, but we can't be obsessed with it. We can't spend our entire lives worrying about it, because all that matters is the time that we are here. Once we cease to exist, it doesn't make any difference. Anyway, I just want to kind of share with you some of the experiences I had this evening. I'm going to keep doing this from time to time. Some of them will be more directed affairs, and some of them will be more free-form like this. And I assume I'll get much better at this as time goes on. But I enjoy doing this, and I feel like it gives me a sort of vent when I've had a difficult day. Whether or not I post this, I probably will, but sometimes I do for every one of these I post, I probably do 3 or 4, and the process itself is very therapeutic. So Anyway, thank you for listening. Live your life. If you have terminal cancer, if you get diagnosed with terminal cancer, think very long and hard about your treatment options. Yeah, and be strong. I'll talk to you later. Good night.